Drive theories. So some of you probably noticed, it depends on how much attention you pay video by video. Some of you probably noticed and were delighted by the fact that the previous video wasn't 10 minutes, it was a bit shorter. I'm going to have to be a little bit asymmetric about this, so some of these will be a bit shorter than 10 minutes, and then there's only 5 of them, and then to compensate for that, drive theories and cognitive theories, both of these areas have a lot of material in them, so they're going to go over 10 minutes, but overall I promise not to take up more time than is promised for a 1-hour lecture. But drive theories. Now, when I say that we're going to be looking at drive theories and how this relates to the perspectives I was talking about before, the earliest drive theories were psychodynamic drive theories, but there were also a bunch of behaviorist drive theories. So that's what I meant before when I was saying that the behaviorism perspectives kind of straddle the middle bit here, because behaviorism covered the later drive theories and the earlier learning and cognitive theories. So we're going to do a bit of behaviorism in this one, a bit of behaviorism in the next one as well, but we're initially looking at psychodynamics here, and we're going to mainly be looking at cognitive psychology after that. So to get into this sort of area, to talk about the general lay of the land and what we mean when we're talking about drive theories, the conceptual precursor to drive theories, the way that old, Victorian scientists and things like this used to talk about the crudest form of driven motivation, both in humans and animals, were the old school instinct theories. Now, instinct is a term we don't use a lot in proper psychology these days, and we don't really use it in ethology and animal behavior anymore, etc. Because, instinct is a little bit too broad a term for a cognitive scientist to use usefully, but exactly what a layperson thinks of as an instinct, this kind of preformed innate compulsion that comes out of a living thing in order to help it organize its behavior, that is literally what we mean in this context. Back in the day, people used to say, well, all animals in their behavioral repertoires have some instincts, and it is from your instincts that most of your motivation comes from. Now, this notion of an instinct means that it's a kind of fixed activity pattern. Your behavioral repertoire has these kind of canned responses built into it, and this is not too dissimilar to the behaviorist notion of having an unconditioned stimulus that brings out an unconditioned response. It's a bit like a reflex in that sense, and people used to use this concept of an instinct to explain all kinds of complicated behavior that animals would do. You would say that spiders have a web weaving instinct. When dogs get wet, they do that reflex where they shake themselves and fling water everywhere as a kind of driven instinct. It's a very crude way to talk about what motivates behavior and why behavior comes about the way that it does, which is why instinct theories did not last very long when applied to human beings. We know that human beings have a bunch, we have a behavioral repertoire, we have a bunch of reflexes that are built into us, we have what might charitably be described as a set of instinctual compulsions, but human behavior is so enormously variable, and we can understand the contours of its variation because we are human beings. It's socially meaningful to us, and human behavior is so context sensitive. Depending on why things are happening and the social and personal context of why something is happening changes our individual behavior so enormously that we have to get a bit more complicated. So this led to the earliest of the drive theories. And then the concept of a drive is basically this notion that it's an internal regulatory control mechanism. It's tuned into something in the outside environment, or it's sensitive to something in the outside environment. And a drive runs by trying to maintain a homeostatic level, by maintaining homeostasis for whatever in the world or whatever in the environment it is sensitive to. So like I said, the earliest drive theories were psychodynamic drive theories, but we'll see some behaviorist ones along the way as well. So some of you will immediately know what I mean when I say homeostasis, especially if you have a bit of biology background under you or maybe some engineering background. But for those of you who aren't initiated, homeostasis is just a process by which a complicated system maintains an optimal state. It kind of sets an optimal state or is built around a particular optimal state, and whenever it detects diversions from that, whether you go above or below a certain level of some important value, homeostasis is the attempt to maintain that value, to return you back to the optimal state whenever there is random or natural diversion from it. So the visual that I'm using here is a thermostat, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. But the important concept to keep in mind, what makes homeostasis possible, is an algorithmic process referred to as a negative feedback loop. Now, when we say a negative feedback loop, we mean that changes in circumstance feed back on the responses of the system, and we say it's negative, not to say that it's bad, but negative feedback is whenever you notice that there is a change from your optimal level, the direction of the change that you then give in response is in the opposite direction. So that's why I use a thermostat as the example here. A lot of people know this on their air conditioners or their heaters or something like this. You set the optimal temperature or the optimal humidity, whatever you want, at the level you want it at, and it has a set of sensors that detect the temperature or detect the humidity, whatever you're interested in. And the negative feedback loop is the process by which, okay, I want it at, let's say 25 degrees Celsius. If I'm detecting that the temperature is above that, I apply cooling. If I detect that the temperature is below that, I apply heating. It's a negative feedback loop because the feedback is always in the opposite direction of the changes that are detected, as opposed to, let's say, a positive feedback loop, which would be, I detect it's hot, so I make it hotter. I detect it's cold, it gets colder. Negative feedback loop is how homeostasis works, about keeping things at their optimal level. And this is not just something that exists in devices. All biological systems rely very heavily on homeostasis. We have detectors inside of our autonomic nervous system that detects our blood pressure. So when we have a kind of baseline blood pressure that is ideal for resting circumstances. When it gets a little bit too high because our blood volume increases, that is detected and it brings your blood pressure down, lowers your heart rate, filters out blood, etc. When your blood pressure is too low, it increases your heart rate to bring your blood pressure back up. The same is true for the pH, the alkalinity or acidity of your blood, your blood glucose levels. All kinds of important levels inside your body are maintained at very, very precise optimal levels by processes of homeostasis. This is the underlying principle of a basic drive theory of motivation. So the notion here is that in the same way that your brain is capable of regulating your ideal blood glucose level, and you release glycogen from your liver if it gets too low, you store glycogen in your liver when it gets too high, always trying to keep at an optimum level. The idea is that there are parts of our mind, there are parts of our brain that are sensitive to certain survival, well, not even necessarily survival, but certain important qualities in the environment. And when we detect that we do not have enough of this, or we need more, or we need to change our behavior in some sense, that negative feedback loop, we subjectively experience that as a sense of tension or discomfort or distress. That's the uncomfortable feeling that we get when we are motivated towards something. So when we don't have the level that we need, it feels unpleasant, and therefore we are motivated to restore that level and therefore have relief, return to the state that we're interested in. So I'm speaking about this in very vague terms, and that's because it's different levels of specificity depending on whether we're talking about the psychodynamic theories or whether we're talking about the behaviorist theories. But in essence, that attempt to maintain a psychological equilibrium is the essence of both of these theories. It's what's characteristic of a drive theory in general. So the earliest drive theories related to Sigmund Freud's work. Sigmund Freud was a neurologist, so he was using his knowledge of other parts of regulatory homeostatic systems inside the brain to base this psychological theory on. And because Freud was all about interpretation, the drives that he was most interested in are the things that we feel when we are motivated and we don't exactly know what for. We only have a vague sense of what it is that we are craving on a psychological level. Freud broke his concept of drives up into two separate drives. Eros, or libido, that is to say, the general drive to satisfy the visceral needs of the body through the stimulation of the mucosa of your body. That's to say, the various orifices. So, you get sustenance by putting things in your mouth. You feel relief when you have pressure in your anus and you excrete to go to the bathroom. You feel a tension in your genitals when you desire sexual intimacy and you release it metaphorically in that sense. And separate from that, we also have a sense of thanatos, or the aggression drive. That is to say that we are aware that our body doesn't always do what we would want it to do, or it sometimes has negative states that we don't approve of. So it is the drive for self-denial, for self-mastery, for control over one's urges, and to see that sense of control embodied in other things. So when you are frustrated because you have a tremor in your hand or something like this, and you put in motivated effort to try to hold it still, that's part of your aggression drive, that's part of your thanatos. Again, Freud just broke it down under these two extremes and said that you are motivated either to gratify yourself or to master yourself. And again, that's largely because Freud's emphasis was on clinically interesting cases where people just didn't quite know why they felt this strong motivation, but you could pull the motivation out as they explored what was going on. So I should say that, again, the notion that the drive emerges from the unconscious. This is a big thing, the role of the subconscious mind in psychodynamics, and how we have to interpret things as they appear in consciousness. That was the emphasis that Freud put on it. And there's additional expansions to drive theory that later psychodynamic researchers did work on, but all of that's going to be covered by some of the other theories that we get to along the way here. So the important thing to keep in mind is that was Freud's emphasis. Drives kind of come out of us. We have to interpret exactly what they mean, and they very often have this kind of seeking satisfaction or seeking mastery sort of element to them. And the real thing that we get out of that, it's set a whole paradigm for other useful material, especially when we get to cognitive psychology later on. The idea is that sometimes we explicitly know what our drives want. It's just inherently obvious to us what it is we need to do to restore psychological equilibrium. But other times we have implicit drives. We can feel the sense of motivation, but we have to experiment with what's going to work and maybe even do something symbolic to seek gratification, because we can't actually get the thing that we're looking for. Now, that all may seem very ephemeral and kind of loose and fuzzy along the way here. It absolutely was, relatively speaking. So what came along after this was the work of the behaviorists. And this is that stuff that I was mentioning before. The need for relatedness to others, the need for self-esteem. These were things that later psychodynamics theorists added to Freud's theories, just because these were directions that psychology was going in later on. But when we talk about cognitive theories and we talk about humanistic theories, we're going to cover those concepts in more detail anyway. So just remember the eros, thanatos, libido, or sex versus aggression drives. That's the essence of the emerging psychodynamic theory. Then we get the behaviorist theories. And again, because behaviorism was a reaction to psychodynamics, it wanted to be a lot more grounded and testable than psychodynamics ever was. The emphasis is a bit different here. What they tried to do is say, okay, let's take a biologically literal framework. Let's keep this homeostatic drive conception, but let's try to apply it to things that we know the senses are literally, looking for in the environment for the survival and reproductive benefits of an animal. I mean, they didn't focus too much on reproduction, the behaviors, but survival, what makes you an effective organism. So the main body of drive theories in the behaviorist perspective now is coalesced together as the main drive theory we ever talk about, in modern psychology, referred to as drive reduction theory, based on the simple notion that our nervous system is equipped in such a way to be sensitive to various survival needs. We feel a sense of hunger when our blood sugar drops. We can detect the osmotic pressure inside of our blood vessels, so we know when we have too little liquid in our body and therefore we need to drink water. That's the experience of thirst, things like this. Just like all of the behaviorist theories of the time, which were built on learning theories, the stimulus-response model we talked about earlier, we have a bunch of biologically innate primary drives for particular survival needs, hunger, thirst, being able to breathe oxygen, being able to rest when we're tired, things like this. And through classical conditioning, and sometimes operant conditioning, we can learn a set of secondary drives, things that we learn to value in the world because they are associated with these other more straightforward sources of gratification. So again, this is just a quick visualization to keep in your notes here of how the feedback, the negative feedback of the homeostatic process works. You register that you have a biological need, a perturbation from your psychological equilibrium. That triggers the drive. The drive makes you feel uncomfortable. It gives you a motivated state. You want to get rid of that uncomfortable sensation. That provokes your goal-oriented behavior. All of the drives in behaviorism have a particular domain to them. I'm hungry, so I need food. I'm thirsty, so I need water, things like this. When the need is satisfied, that drive tension goes away, and you feel that relief, that satisfying, reinforcing sensation of satiation, as they call it, and therefore the homeostasis, the balance, is restored. Now, again, I made quick reference to this before, but in the language of, in the same way we talk about primary and secondary reinforcers, this is part of the learning theory along the way here, that means that we have primary drives, hunger, thirst, tiredness, loneliness, arousal, things like this, and we can also develop secondary drives via classical conditioning association with these things. So, we like money because we know money can buy all the rest of these things. We like social approval because we know that increases our access to anything else we might want in the world, etc. Now, between the insights of the psychodynamic and the behaviorist approach, we can put together this overall conception of drive theories, and that's the big takeaway that is going to be adding to our overall conception of motivation as we talk about it here today. Our drives are initially unconscious. They're computed unconsciously in the mind by various circuits in the brain, and the sensation of need, the motivating sensation, emerges into consciousness. Sometimes, that tension and discomfort has an immediately obvious domain to it. So, you're hungry, you want food, things like this. Or sometimes, it needs interpretation. It feels vague, and you need to figure out what you need to do in order to satisfy your drive. And what it is in the world that inspires drive-oriented behavior from us, there's a set of things that are innate, that we inherit as survival domains of relevance. But again, through classical conditioning primarily, we can learn new forms of secondary drives. Now, one last thing I should mention here. So this is the structure of all drive theories, and it is the main contribution we're talking about here. There is technically one other thing from this time period in psychology, which was another popular theory of motivation referred to as arousal theory. And the simplest way that I could put it is that arousal theory is drive theory without any drives. So, it doesn't go into a lot of the specific detail that modern drive theories like drive reduction theory do. But it basically is just this notion that, I have a state of psychological equilibrium. Anything that upsets me or makes me feel unpleasant perturbs my psychological equilibrium. So again, for homeostatic desires, I try to do anything I can to get my tension or arousal back to the appropriate level. I never want to be bored. I never want to be overstimulated. I'm always trying to stay level. Some very simple modes of behavior analysis rely on arousal theory, so they don't have to go into the details of particular drives. But it's the same overall concept, the negative feedback, the homeostasis. So this is the last model that I'm leaving you with here. So this is stage 1 of the model that I'm going to build up, color-coded, as you can see in the top corner, which should be just below me right now, given where my little head is. This blue is psychodynamic, red is behaviorist, and then we'll add green cognitive, orange humanistic, and purple evolutionary as we go along here. But so far, our account of how human motivation works is that we experience drives. Drives are biophysiological in nature. They try to maintain homeostasis. They are initially unconscious, and we can learn other drives by association, but they're usually biologically innate. Then we do something. We figure out somehow what it is we're going to do. That's the question marks in the middle here. And then our behavior either meets our drives directly, so we have satiation that reduces our drives, our motivation is satisfied, or we have, in the psychodynamic conception, when it's very hazy, we sometimes have symbolic gratification. So you do something close enough to what you were thinking of or what you were desiring, and that gives you satiation or drive reduction as well. So, cognitive theories. And there's 3 main big cognitive theories we're going to talk about. I'll see you there.